Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 61 brawlers from the very worst all the way up to the very best. So these brawlers are going to be compared to each other through 3v3 modes only, and also really the competitive meta. So mainly it's going to look at the Power League meta, so bear that in mind. I will of course explain these rankings in as much detail as possible. So before we jump into it, make sure you're using the create code, that'd be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's hop right into it. Alright guys, so jumping into the very worst brawler in the game. At number 61 we have Ego, so should be no surprises here. Even with his recent supercharge gear, I don't think it's really helped him out whatsoever. Only charges his super about 3 seconds quicker, which really doesn't help too much because most time in 3v3 modes, he just gets pinched too easily and he's a little bit too squishy, and it's really hard to get value out of Ego whatsoever in 3v3. So next up at number 60 we have Dynamite. So Dynamite has always been in the bottom 10 brawlers in the game for a while. It leads to think that surely he's going to get some type of rework, because in competitive play, it's so hard to hit anyone that just has any sort of juking capabilities, right? It's so easy to get up and close and personal to Dynamite, because it just takes forever for his main attack to actually explode. So next up at number 59, we have Shelly. So Shelly, of course, is a brawler which is only good against those tankier options, and she's not really seen whatsoever in competitive. Even when there's like 2 tanks in play, she's just not that great, because tanks aren't really good outside of Heist right now. So, and her game modes are really like Brawl, for example. So that's why you never really see Shelly in the meta, and literally every single brawler will just beat her in a 1v1. Next up at number 58, we have Mr. P. So Mr. P for some time now has been such a terrible brawler, which I kind of like a little bit, because Mr. P metas are extremely toxic, but within competitive play, just isn't a reason to pick Mr. P. Like normally he's a counter pick to a few brawlers like B and Jean, but B and Jean are literally some of the best brawlers in the game right now. Mr. P is still really bad, so just leads to say that he definitely needs a buff. Next up at number 57, we have Jessie. So Jessie has been a bad brawler in the meta for a little while now, ever since she kept getting those damage nerfs. And I feel like she just really sucks in the meta because it takes such a long time to get her turret. She has a really slow projectile speed, and she's only really strong in hot zone. So next up at number 56, we have BB. So for BB, I feel like BB isn't like a completely unusable brawler, but I just feel like other brawlers around her and above her just have more place in the meta for her. Like she isn't really a strong counter pick to any brawler really on any map. But when you're playing ladder, she can of course be usable, but this is mainly competitive and she's just never used. Okay, so next up at number 55, we have Frank. So Frank, he's got a really low ranking. He is usable again on ladder, specifically on Brawl, but we're talking competitive here, and he must have a million counters, right? Frank is just so easy to counter and get value out of. He don't really have a strong game mode, seen as like Siege used to be a game mode where you used to be able to push him a little bit. Of course that is removed, and it just isn't anywhere that he can shine right now. Next up at number 54, we have El Primo. So El Primo still has this little niche when it comes down to the meta and Power League. Sometimes you can pull out a Primo when, for example, there's multiple tanks, or if you're on a super grassy map like Sneaky Field, sometimes you can get away with it, but for the most part, just get countered too easily. Even with the recent supercharged gear, just takes too long to get his super, and a lot of times you just end up feeding more valuable supers in the game. So next up at number 53, we have Mortis. So Mortis is a brawler which, of course, is really annoying to face off against on ladder, but in the Power League draft format, he just gets countered way too easily. I don't remember the last time I seen Mortis in competitive, and he was always that really strong pop-off brawler like a year ago. But, you know, ever since he got those nerfs to Creepy Harvest, there's just other brawlers you'd rather go that just get a lot more value out of. And then sometimes when you like waste your bats, for example, it just takes so long to get back into the game. Okay, so next up at number 52, we have Sandy. So Sandy is a brawler that seems like he's okay in some game modes like Gem Grab and Brawl, but I would say again in the Power League meta, I just don't see him whatsoever. He's never used in competitive. It's been such a long time since he's been used. He used to be literally the staple to Brawl, specifically on maps like Super Beach, where he was just so good at wall peeking. It just takes him so long to get his super, and he barely does any damage. Literally every brawler can beat him in a 1v1. Okay, so next up at number 51, we have Jackie. So Jackie is a brawler which, of course, is always at the bottom of the meta. She suited the meta a little bit better last time around, but now there's just so many wall breaks, grifts, roughs, just everywhere, specifically in Brawl, which is her best mode. So I don't really see her being used too much, but I think with a nice buff to the rebuild gadget, you could actually see her being pretty meta. Okay, so next up at number 50, we have Bull. So Bull is still a brawler which hasn't received any sort of changes for a little while now. He still excels really well in Heist because, of course, you always want that damage dealer so he can fit into the meta there. But other than that, he isn't really used whatsoever. even when it comes down to pairing with Poco, there's just so many better tank options out there. So coming in at number 49, we have Colt. So Colt has received a little bit of a buff with his reload speed gear, but I feel like as time's gone on, like, it's just getting even worse and worse in the meta, and probably we'll see in the next months to come, he just won't be used again whatsoever. But it still has this niche in heist, because that reload gear paired with the damage gear can lead to a lot of damage, specifically on maps like Bridge Too Far and Safe Zone. Okay, so now jumping in at number 48, we have Byron. So Byron right now is so incredibly hard to use. It's only really saw on super long range maps that are really passive, like Shooting Star, for example, Dry Season, a couple of maps where, you know, you can hide behind walls a lot, and also, you know, it's a long range meta, so you can counter other long range brawlers like B, for example, because of his projectile speed. But that's probably the only niche he has in the meta, because all of these assassins, just any type of aggro, just really can overwhelm him so quickly, and he's easily one of the worst brawlers in the game right now. Next up at number 47, we have Rosa. So Rosa is a brawler that you can still last pick on a few maps and get amazing results with, because she's just so strong with her gadget and her speed gear. It's pretty hard if you don't draft right. So on maps like Sneaky Fields, for example, you always got to be careful of those tanky options, and that's where Rosa can really fill into the meta. She's still pretty decent on hard rock mine as well, but I just feel like still it's pretty hard to use her outside of like a 6th pick. So next up at number 46, we have Tara. So with Tara, I feel like she's always really usable on ladder, but her play rate in competitive is literally 0. I've not seen a Tara for a good 2 or 3 months now, which just leads to me to think that, of course, like, as I said, she's decent. She's definitely pushable on gem grab and bribble in ladder, but there's just way better options in terms of lanes. I feel like she just doesn't have the best survivability. Once her gadgets are gone, it's really easy to pick on a Tara. So next up at number 45, we have Grom. So Grom is definitely a high risk, high reward brawler. A lot of times it may not work out because he just gets overwhelmed so easily, but in the right setting, in knockout, I've seen him a few times in center stage meta as well as a last pick. It can be pretty good, but as I said, you really have to be on point with Grom. But if your accuracy is really good, he does an insane amount of damage. So next up at number 44, we have Sam. So Sam was easily one of the best brawlers in the game with a last meta, but with the recent nerf to his star power, you only replenish 20% of health instead of 30%. It's really hurt him in the meta. You can feel it instantly, the amount of recovery you could get off that star power, which of course hurts him in the meta. You don't really see him at all in Power League or competitive because it's just far better options, but still in ladder you can easily overwhelm an opponent with that speed boost and the 2k damage you get with that super. Next up at number 43, we have Leon. So since the vision gear has of course became any bit relevant in the meta, Leon has really struggled, specifically in Power League, right? Because in the Power League meta, literally anyone can just switch on the vision gear and they'll just counter Leon because invisibility is just so weak with vision gear. Of course, he's not going to be able to sneak up into his opponents, so it literally just ruins the best part about him. But Leon is still a brawler which is pretty decent, you know, in ladder as well, can be pretty strong and has always just been pretty flexible in multiple game modes. Okay, so next up at number 42, we have Meg. So if I was to make this tier list like 5 or 6 days ago, I'd have still put Meg as a bottom 10 brawler, but I think as time has gone on, people have started to warm to her a little bit. She only received a tiny buff, which really didn't do too much, but I just think the hot zone meta suits her a lot better. You see her a lot on Ring of Fire and Open Zone and seen some really good win rates. So next up at number 41, we have Pam. So Pam used to be a brawler that dominated the meta at the beginning of the kind of competitive season around March time. As time has gone on, people are just more aware of her Scrap Sucker gadget, and there's just other alternatives out there. I just feel like aggression is nowhere near as good anymore, and for me she's just okay everywhere, but still I rarely see her in competitive, and when I do, a lot of times she just feeds people those supers. So next up at number 40, we have Barley. So you'll be pleased to hear a little bit that the buff to Barley's damage did have a decent impact on him in the meta now, more so than ever. You've seen him being picked as a last pick, or of course banned when the enemy have that last pick on quite a few maps, you know, maps that throwers are really good on, locking down those chokeholds. You know, probably the maps that you normally want to see throwers on, you know, like Super Beach, for example, he can really lock down their lane. And that's where his niche is, because in Knockout and Bounty, of course, Barley isn't that strong. Other throwers just have a better range, but still, this damage buff has been really nice. So next up at number 39, we have Lou. So Lou is a brawler which I thought was going to see at the top of the meta, of course, from a video like a week ago. but as time has gone on, people still probably dodge his main attack a little bit too easily. But within the hot zone meta, he's incredibly toxic. With the change of his super gear, it made it so he only needs 6 hits instead of 7, so only 2 pieces of ammo instead of 3. It's a big change. As I said, hot zone, he's super toxic in, but I still feel like with his main attack, specifically against the best of the best, it's just too hard to hit those shots. So next up at number 38, we have Buzz. So Buzz is definitely a high risk, high reward brawler. It does take a lot of skill to actually make him work within even like ladder. It can be pretty difficult because there are a lot of brawlers that can still stun out his super, but still he's that pop-off brawler where if you can get on the right matchup, you can really make a big difference. Next up at number 37, we have Nani. So Nani is still a brawler that is struggling a little bit in the meta, but she still has her niche in bounty, knockout, and somewhat okay in heist, mainly because of the supercharging gear. You know, probably without it, I'd have put her a lot worse off because she was starting to kind of be erased from the meta, but it has really helped. It's enabled her to cycle ahead much quicker, and you now see her picked a lot in knockout. Next up at number 36, we have Nita. So Nita is a brawler which of course can be really strong in certain circumstances. She's really strong on heist and a pretty good brawler in Brawl overall. She does get countered a little bit by those brawlers that tend to open up the lanes a lot in Brawl, so that's probably why more so heist is her strongest mode, because she's really strong at turning counter attacks to really good damage to the save. So next up at number 35, we have Ems. So Ems is a brawler which is typically pretty strong in the Power League draft. You don't really see her picked like all of the time, but on certain game modes and maps she can really thrive, you know, like Hot Potato for example, Sneaker Fields, any map that has a lot of grass, you're going to get a lot of value out of the Ems, and specifically because the enemy team can't really go a tank, because Ems can literally 1v3 tanks. Next up at number 34, we have 8-Bit. So surprisingly, he's getting a lot better in the meta, specifically making more appearances in Gem Grab and also heist in general because of his reload gear. Is making him so he's just dealing, of course, a lot more damage. Specifically in heist, he's always been that big high damage dealer, but now you started seeing him a lot, you know, in Bridge Too Far, Save Zone, he's kind of that mid. Even when there's multiple counters, all you need is just one decent attack with 8-Bit and you're going to be absolutely shredding the save. Next up at number 33, we have Spike. So Spike right now is making a little bit of a resurgence in the meta, mainly in Brawl, sometimes in Hot Zone as well. I'm seeing him picked a few times, but still, you got to be careful of Spike because he is a little bit too squishy, and that's probably why he's not seen so much in the meta, because he can get overwhelmed still a little bit, but it's still a brawler that you can pretty much use in every single game mode, probably bar the likes of Bounty and Knockout. He's just okay everywhere, but I'd say most lanes are still better than him. So next up at number 32, we have Daryl. So Daryl is a brawler which is incredibly strong in heist. You see him being picked first near enough all of the time because he's that certified damage dealer. He's a lot better than a lot of other tanks out there because he automatically charges his super. So that's why he's really strong in heist, but you don't really see him in other game modes right now. Maybe the odd time in game modes like Bounty, maybe as a decent assassin, but still his niche is definitely heist. So next up at number 31, we have Fang. So Fang is a brawler which is so incredibly strong in knockout. You really got to be careful of a Fang towards the end of the draft stage because he can really pop off. He only of course needs one super, and a lot of the time he'll just be bouncing between people, and it's just really hard to stop a Fang in a game mode like knockout. Overall, he's still pretty usable on a lot of different game modes and maps, but that's definitely his niche. So next up at number 30, we have Colette. So Colette really shone a couple of metas ago because she countered a lot of the meta brawlers, but right now I'd say the middle of the pack is about fair for her because you only really see her in heist right now. She's really good in heist, specifically because she's such an amazing damage dealer, but still in other game modes there's just better tank counters out there, you know, like Gale, Otis, and there's either like brawlers like Griffin and meta that counter a little bit too much, specifically with that business resilience. It's really hard to win that matchup. So next up at number 29, we have Lola. So it might feel like a really low ranking for Lola, but still I don't really see her being used too much in the meta right now. She has her decent game modes in Hot Zone and in heist, but still feel like since they nerfed the freeze frame gadget, she really hasn't got much. So next up at number 28, we have Eve. So Eve is actually making a little bit of a comeback in the meta. That's why she's around the middle. The reload speed gear has really helped her out. Also on top of that, the damage, you know, it's really helped her find her way in the meta, and she's not toxic, which is pretty nice. She's really strong in knockout, bounty, and any map with a lot of water. You actually see her being picked quite a few times. So next up at number 27, we have Ash. So as you guys know, no matter the meta, Ash is an insane last pick brawler. You've got to be really careful of a good Ash because he can play well against multiple options. He's just really strong right now, especially since the addition of his super gear. It made it so you only need to super in 4 hits instead of 5, which is a big change. You're allowed to cycle your super, which you rats are like the best thing about you because it allows you to get your rage up so incredibly fast. You compare that with the healing gadget and it's just pretty hard to kill an Ash, which is just constantly cycling his rage. So next up at number 26, we have Poco. So with Poco, I'm also kind of thinking about this ranking without Buster right now because Buster is absolutely insane and Poco paired with him is breaking the meta on a lot of different game modes. But if we're talking more so, you know, when Buster's banned out and probably when he gets a nerf, you know, Poco will of course fall in the meta. So I'd say this is a reasonable stand-in for him because really without Buster, he's only really seen in like Hot Zone, maybe a few Brawl maps, because once you open it up the map, you can counter Poco pretty hot. So next up at number 25, we have Piper. So still, even with a max meta, Piper is still a pretty strong brawler in the meta, mainly in game modes like Bounty, maps like Layer Cake. She's actually picked as the first pick a lot because you can either put her in the middle or down the lane, and also in Knockout. She's just such a strong power pick in this meta. So next up at number 24, we have Crow. So I thought the nerf to his slow and toxin from 5 seconds to 3 seconds would really kill him, but I think this is a really fair placing for Crow because he's not too toxic, but he's still a strong pick on certain maps, you know, like Double Swoosh. Any Hot Zone map you get a lot of value out of. He's a fantastic counter to some of the meta brawlers like Max, for example, and his jump still has a lot of value. Next up at number 23, we have Rico. So I was actually debating to put him a little bit lower because I feel like Rico is starting to fall down in the meta quite a fair bit because he hasn't really got any way to defend himself, but on certain maps he's an insane first pick. You know, Hard Rock Mine, for example, Hot Potato. It can be really flexible at shutting down multiple lanes. Next up at number 22, we have Surge. Surge's best game mode is definitely Brawl right now. He can be a fantastic counter to a lot of the meta Brawl brawlers like Cole, for example, but still in those really high skill cap games, Surge can take a long time to get his upgrade, and that's why you see a lot of time people actually use Power Surge because people just really learn how to keep their distance against a Surge and not feed him his levels. Next up at number 21, we have Tick. So Tick right now is starting to be a little bit better in the meta because he's only one of 2 brawlers that has the brand new mythic gear, and the gear is pretty toxic. It's pretty hard for a single brawler to take down that Tick head, so of course you're going to get more value out of Tick, but you're just starting to see him a lot more again in game modes like Knockout and Bounty. You know, started to slip off the meta a little bit because there was just super aggressive brawlers like Janet and Bonnie literally everywhere, but now Tick definitely has a little bit of punch left in him. So next up at number 20, we have Sprout. So if we're talking specifically ladder, Sprout is actually one of the worst brawlers or one of the hardest brawlers to push because there's just so much aggro on ladder, but in Power League, this is what I'm basing the ranking off right. He's insane as a last pick. There's multiple game modes and scenarios where Sprout is just such a toxic last pick, especially since the introduction of the super gear. It only takes him 4 hits to get his super instead of 5, and it just enables him to shut off so many different choke points and be so incredibly toxic. Next up at number 19 in the meta, it is Gale. So Gale is an incredibly frustrating brawler to face off against if you're an aggro brawler, right? Because he has a super which just constantly stun locks you, and then he has his gadget which is just really annoying to face off against. So yeah, Gale is still pretty strong in the meta. He's actually one of the few counters to a brawler like Buster, so make sure to use him, especially in game modes like Brawl. You see him a few times in other game modes as well because he just gets such amazing value out of his super. Next up at number 18, we have Bo. So Bo is definitely a brawler which is probably picked the most in Power League right now across multiple ranges because it's pretty easy to use and his mines are pretty annoying. But I would say in competitive, his mode which he really thrives on is definitely Hot Zone. Everywhere else he can be seen as a somewhat decent pick on. It just depends on the matchup. But overall, Hot Zone's where you want to be staying with him because of his mines, just being able to stop a lot of attacks with constant mine spam. Next up at number 17, we have Amber. So of course, we've had the introduction of the reload gear. It's really helped her out in the meta. Already, she was a pretty flexible brawler. She was just used a lot on a lot of game modes and maps where that super is going to enable you to just get so much value out of. A lot of times you can cycle your super pretty easily with the star power, and also there's just a lot of brawlers which only really take a couple of shots and then your super to take take them out. So that's why she's really strong in this meta. So next up, as the 16th best brawler in the meta, we have Brock. So Brock has made an amazing turnaround in the meta. Normally he was only used in heist, but the reload gear has really propelled him up in the meta because of course he has one of the slowest reloads in the game, so it really helps him to keep up the pressure, and especially if you keep your distance with him, you're going to constantly hit shots. So in game modes like Bounty is being used pretty much all of the time, Heist is being used pretty much everywhere there, even Hot Zone sometimes, and Knockout is so incredibly strong, so making sure you're getting good use out of that reload gear with Brock. So next up, coming in at number 15, we have Stu. So Stu is still an amazing brawler within this meta. Of course, we had that bug which allowed him to get his super free, and then they did nerf that and then actually buffed him by like 100 HP. It has helped him out a little bit because he's still really strong in Hot Zone, and he's started to be used in multiple game modes as well. You know, some circumstances in Gem Grab, it will be picked up because he's pretty flexible as a mid or a lane. And then also, of course, I've said Hot Zone, that Speed Zone gadget is really strong, and then Brawl as well with his breakthrough gadget. It can be an amazing counter to a lot of different brawlers. So next up, as the 14th best brawler in the game, we have Bonnie. So even though she's at number 14, normally she's always top 10, she's still a really insane brawler. It was pretty hard to rank a lot of these brawlers in and around her, so she was pretty much like the 5th best picked and most banned out brawler within the last competitive set of data that we got. But overall, I feel like she's just mainly got her niche. Like, she's pretty strong on Bounty in some circumstances. Her main niche is actually in Knockout right now, where she's pretty much picked or banned every single time. But there's just a few more counters out there to a Bonnie. A lot of people are more aware of her jumping in and like to save like a gadget or a super for that. So next up at number 13, we have Squeak. And Squeak as a last pick within this meta is extremely dangerous. You see him banned out a lot because so many people are scared of facing off against a Squeak if they have, you know, multiple squishy brawlers or they have no aggro to kind of defeat him. Of course, as I mentioned, aggro is going to be really hard to deal against with a Squeak, but if you draft perfectly and have that Squeak towards the end, you're going to completely dominate. His residue gadget lasts for such a long time, and pretty much in every single mode and map, you're going to get so much value out of that gadget. So next up, as the 12th best brawler within this meta, it is Jean. So Jean within ladder may not be that pop-off brawler, but within draft, the reason why he's so strong is because he's a really good safe pick. By that I mean is that there's not many brawlers that actually counter out a Jean, so you can always pretty much comfortably pick him in draft on certain game modes because you just know you're not going to get countered, and that's what you kind of aim for within Power League or competitive, is not getting countered. So he's a really strong option in Bounty. He gets picked pretty often in Bounty, same with Knockout as well, because they're pretty defensive game modes. It does have his appearances odd every now and then in game modes like Brawl and Gem Grab as well. Next up, as the 11th best brawler within this meta, we have Belle. So Belle seems incredibly toxic to face off against in the mid interaction. Since the reload speed gear, it just made her infinitely spam shots over and over again. So she's starting to be picked a lot in the draft format. She isn't banned out too much because she isn't really too toxic, but just a really flexible brawler. She always has a decent matchup, and she actually counters a few of the meta brawlers as well. You know, brawlers like Bonnie, for example, like B, she has a really strong matchup against. She's pretty strong in multiple game modes right now, like Heist, you know, the longer range maps in Brawl, Gem Grab, she can be used pretty often, Bounty as well, and Knockout. So she's a really flexible brawler and a really strong one right now. Okay, so next up, as the 10th best brawler within the meta right now, we have Gus. So even though some people may have anticipated him being a little bit higher, I feel like this is the perfect placement for him because, of course, in the right setting, it can be incredibly toxic, but it's mainly on game modes like Bounty, Knockout, and Hot Zone. So these are game modes which a lot of times you're going to be probably grouped up and being a lot quite defensive, because of course Gus really needs his teammates around him to survive. He doesn't have the most damage, but since the introduction of his second star power, he's been able to have a little bit more firepower. But as I said, some people still overrate him a little bit. I think 10's a fair placement because he is pretty much like the king of Knockout and on some other passive Bounty maps as well. Okay, so next up, as the 9th best brawler within this meta, we have Cole. So we're starting to see the return of the Cole meta again. I feel like in a couple of weeks we could see his ranking even higher, but for now I was a little bit scared to put him as high as I really wanted to. So within the recent competitive data, it was actually the second most played brawler and also the second most banned brawler. So it just goes to show that pros really value Cole as a pick right now. This is probably mainly because you don't really see too much Colette in the meta, and he's just a really good like aggressive option, specifically in Brawl, you know, Bounty to pick up the mid star, or just any matchup, you know, can really exert a lot of pressure without flying hold. So next up, as the 8th best brawler within the meta right now, we have B. So of course B is dominating the meta right now, specifically on those more longer range maps. You know, there's still is starting to be a few counters to her. You know, brawlers like Carla starting to come back in the meta quite a bit. Brawlers like Bella starting to make a lot more appearances against her because she has a bit of a better matchup, but still overall she holds so much value. The ability to cycle 3k so easily, have damage gain on top of this, it's like nearly 4k damage. The shield star power as well is making her a lot less squishy, and it's just, you know, every single game mode she's been seen on and dominate. Next up, coming in as the 7th best brawler within the meta right now, we have Griff. So Griff is still insane in this meta. You add on the reload gear to him and it makes him so incredibly toxic. So he's actually not being played too much in competitive right now as the previous metas, so maybe a little bit of worrying signs to come. I feel like sometimes he can get out damaged in a 1v1. There's multiple brawlers that can actually counter him out. You know, brawlers like Stu, for example. I'm seeing even Spike coming into the meta to counter him. But anyways, he's still really strong, right? Because of those gadgets, the ability to break open a map on multiple game modes and just, you know, kind of shape it the way you want to. Sometimes it can actually work against you. So that's probably why you don't see him being played as much as in competitive as he used to. Okay, so next up, as the 6th best brawler within the meta right now, we have Russ. So I might be a little bit surprised to some of you guys, but in terms of Power League, he is insane. There's not really many brawlers that can full out counter him because he just has so many different you know, mechanics to make him so strong. Even in 1v1s, he's pretty toxic to face off against, and if you do face him off in a 1v1, you're just going to feed his super. So he's always that like comfort pick when it comes down to competitive. He was actually the most picked brawler in the recent competitive in ESL, which just goes to show like pros really value Ruffs as a pick, because at the beginning stages of draft, you know, you want a brawler which is pretty good against everything, and Ruffs is that brawler. You know, he's strong on certain bounty maps like Layer Cake, really strong in Brawl because of his air superiority star power, being able to break open the map. You know, gem grab is pretty toxic to face off against, and in lane heist, you know, pit stop, really easy to get value out of. There's just multiple game modes and maps he really thrives on. Okay, so now moving into the top 5 brawlers in the meta right now, starting off at number 5 with Penny. So Penny is still dominating the meta. The main reason why she's at the top 5 in the ranking is again because of her flexibility. She's pretty much picked all of her time in Power League right now and in competitive. She was one of the most banned out brawlers and also one of the most picked brawlers, mainly because you can pretty much, whether you're like a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th pick a Penny, because she's just good against everything. So this, you're talking about, you know, maps like Layer Cake and Bounty. Brawl, she's seen pretty much all the time, even on sneaky fields, because you can use her as a mid or a lane. Gem grab as well, you can use her as a lane pretty much everywhere. Heist, she can be pretty toxic. Hot zone, she's really annoying, specifically with that turret, and even in knockouts. So again, if you're ever in doubt in like a brawler to go, just go Penny, because there's hardly any counters to her. Okay, so now coming in as the 4th best brawler within the game right now, we still have Janet. So still, even when the meta shifts a little bit, she still continues to be one of the best brawlers within the game. Need I really say any more? She's just good at everything, right? She's good at multiple matchups. The only really true counter to her is a lot of aggression, because of course she doesn't have a ton of DPS, but still she manages to free shot a lot of the meta brawlers. So super gets a lot of value. She's got 2 really good gadgets. You got one for the really bushy maps, which of course you can scout the grass, but then her other gadget is really underrated, Backstage Pass. You see it used quite a fair bit in competitive to get some really good aggression. So yeah, Janet in Power League is always that safe option. Okay, so now moving into the 3rd best brawler within the meta right now, we have Max. So Max, it was the most banned out brawler by far in the recent competitive. It just goes to show that Max is just an incredible flex brawler. By that I mean she's good into pretty much everything, and also good with everything in her compositions. She synergizes with everything. Her speed is one of the best supers within the game. You can overwhelm so many compositions. She's a great counter to so many of the meta brawlers. As I said, she's good everywhere. Literally every single game mode, every single map, you're going to get some insane value with her. Okay, so now moving into the 2nd best brawler within the meta right now. No surprises here whatsoever. We have Otis. So Otis is a brawler which, of course, we've discussed so many times, but he still continues to be one of the best brawlers within the game, or the 2nd best brawler in the game, because of his versatility. His main attack is just so easy to use on so many different maps, and of course he counters tanks as well. So he's literally got everything. He's pretty much one of the most banned out brawlers and picked brawlers within competitive right now. So just going to show, like, no matter where in the draft, is being picked. He's not being banned out pretty much all of the time, because sometimes, you know, in longer range encounters, you know, he sometimes struggles to get a little bit of damage, but still overall, once you do get the mute and cycle it, specifically with a supercharged gear as well, he's so toxic to face off against. Okay, and finally moving into the best brawler within the game right now, we have Buster. So of course, a lot of people are like, here we go again, we have one of the new brawlers as the best brawler in the game. But I'm not overreacting here whatsoever. I think every single pro player or any player that has got their hands on Buster can easily tell he's the best brawler within the game. He's so broken, guys. One of the best brawlers that's ever been released in Brawl Stars. Everything about him is so strong. It's so hard to counter him in a lane. I'm seeing so many people get some insane pushes in rank 35s. You know, I've seen Ash, especially on Twitter, get like multiple 30-second games time and time again in Brawl. You know, as a lane, it's really hard to counter him. I can't really pinpoint many counters to him because he has insane range as a tank. He has the ability to pierce. You know, his super is really toxic because whilst you're actually supering out with that shield, you know, of course, they're actually rebounding to the opponents, but also you're healing up as well. So once that's popped, well, once the super is down, of course, you're going to be healed up. And then you can also cancel that shield at any point in time. I just think he's the ultimate brawler. Seeing as he's a tank, you can pretty much play him everywhere. I've even struggled to face off against him on those longer range maps because once he gets his super, it's so hard to kill him. All right, guys, it's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think of the ranking in the comment section below. I think this is a really accurate tier list based on mainly competitive data. Like, of course, you can kind of generalize some brawlers, like maybe, you know, in other tier lists I've seen like Spike a lot higher or other brawlers like that because, you know, they're decent across multiple modes, but still they don't really get picked. They still get outshone by a lot of different brawlers. So that's why you see, you know, brawlers like Spike quite lower on the rankings. But overall, I think this is a great comparison to the actual competitive tier list that the actual pro players play, right? So this is going to be at the highest level. But let me know whether you want me to do like a tier list for like the mid level, because I've seen that across other games where, you know, it's pretty popular, those type of tier lists. So let me know whether you want to see that. But also Buster, by the way, it's just completely broken. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be shocked if I seen like an emergency nerf for him because he's just broken in many aspects. So probably watch out for that and push him as quickly as possible if you do have him unlocked. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today's video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.